All right. Well, it's 1 o'clock. Why don't we go ahead and kick things off? Everybody, welcome. Glad you're able to join us for this webinar where we're going to be looking at conditional access in Entra in the new Entra suite and the specifically conditional access functionality and some of the aspects of what is the security service edge. Global secure access is the part of Entra which directly ties into the security service edge, but we'll be unpacking that as we go. Just by way of introduction, my name is Aaron Greer. I am a security solution architect with Atmosera. I have been working in the security space for about 8 years now and have been in IT for 20 years, have been working with directory systems and identity and access management since, and this is going to date myself here, since on-prem Active Directory was just a dream that the Exchange X500 directory was having when it was thinking about what it wanted to be when it grew up. And so I've got a little bit of perspective to bring to this. Atmosera is a company. We do managed services, managed Azure services. We're an MSP, managed provider. And we also do managed security services, managed SOC, and managed security governance. And I'll tell you, in all my time in the industry, I'm new to Atmosera, but I am just super impressed by our managed services team. And we also do professional services. So we are around to consult and engage and do systems integration and get you to where you need to go. So that said, here is the plan. I don't want to make any assumptions about the background that people are coming to this with. So as much as I would like to say, hey, everybody should know about conditional access at this point, I think we can't assume that. So I want to do a basic conceptual review of Entra conceptual or conditional access, then do a bit of a review on the security service edge and the global secure access capabilities that we now have. And then we can talk about how they can work together, because they really are two great tastes that taste great together. So we'll go ahead and we'll get the peanut butter and the chocolate together and take a look at how they combine. And then we'll do a little question, answer, and discussion session with the time that we've got left. So Entra conditional access. And here, it basically boils down to getting some control over who can access what, from where, and how can they do it. But we do need to stop and ask ourselves why. So I'm going to switch gears and go into the Entra conditional access policy screen and walk through some of those questions, and then we can talk about, the why of it, because you're going to see this gets pretty powerful. And when we have powerful tools that can get into a lot, there's always a potential for it getting a little confusing. So let me do this conditional access policy that I have configured to get to dynamics from only approved devices. So the who is when we're configuring conditional access policies, we want to say, who does this apply to? Who either do we want to say can get to something or can't get to something? And so here, generally, we will choose a group or a large category. We can do tie it to specific roles. All users, yeah, we can do all users, but generally you don't want to do that. Good way to overextend. Then that's who can access what, and what is the target. So here we have this particular policy scoped to Dynamics 365, but we could look at any of the cloud apps. We can look at specific things users are trying to do. And this global secure access preview, you remember when I was saying SSE, global secure access, keep this in mind. We will come back to it. So in this example, it's, hey, users from accounting getting into Dynamics, network location. This is where we can start defining a bit of that where question, although it extends into conditions. So where are you trying to access from? And that can be selected network locations, which you can define, trusted network locations, which you would list out as, say, your company's HQ, your on-prem locations, or, and we'll get back to this, all compliant network locations, which is an easy management path that we get with global secure access. So the conditions are where it starts getting a little bit more interesting.
Excuse me, Aaron.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Your screen is blurry for us in the audience. I'm not quite sure why.
Let me see if I can share my screen differently. I'm trying to use my webcam software to do that, but let me see if I can. How's that?
That's it.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. So again, where, if we look at the conditions under which this policy is going to apply, we have some things about user risk and sign-in risk, which I'll circle back to. And interestingly, we can also put these policies together with telemetry from Purview and Purview's insider risk management. So if somebody is a high insider risk, we can subject them to a particular policy. But if we look at device platforms, so do we want to have this be a policy that applies to mobile devices? Do we want to have it only apply to Windows devices? Do we want to exclude some of them? We can talk about where somebody is trying to do that connection from. And even getting into the controls. So here's where we say we're going to grant access, we're going to block access, or we're going to grant access, but we're going to make you jump through some hoops. And this gets into both that and how can somebody connect? So what hoops do they need to jump through? But if you think about it, it also speaks to that from where, because if we need to have them make that connection from a managed device, which is joined into the organization and is marked as compliant, then that speaks to where somebody is connecting from. So there are multiple ways to look at this. And even though this falls into multiple categories, I'm going to go back really quickly to the slide. And looking at why. And this is where, just even a quick glance through these configuration options, you can get lost in it pretty quickly. And there's lots of cool things you can do. But at the end of the day, we are configuring these controls as an expression of our security policy. So knowing your organization's security policies, where they're coming from, what does your regulatory environment look like? How does that translate into your written defined security policies? How does that translate into a security baseline that defines why you would need to put particular protections on the access of particular types of information? So stop sharing for just a second here and just go back to, hopefully everyone can actually see me at this point. I'm gonna turn to, let's just zoom in a little bit here. So looking at picking apart the why and the differences here. So we've got our Entra tenant, and I realize I've made this a little small. Hopefully, Rachel, is this coming through okay? Size-wise?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the rule that we had was a rule to connect to Dynamics, which I'm going to attempt to make that weird little trapezoid icon. And so we've got this conditional access policy set that we're going to encounter whenever we try and connect to it. So, here I am with my laptop, high art going on here. When I try and get to that Dynamics, then, I'm forced to do this evaluation. And, am I on-prem in an office? Am I at Starbucks drinking a Frappuccino while I work? Or am I at home? And getting back to the why, you could say, oh, well, maybe if I'm in the office, do I not need to worry about MFA? Is my office secure enough that the presence on an office network really is an identification factor? If I look at whether or not I'm accessing a capability from a managed and compliant device, does that change if I'm in the office or if I'm at some unknown remote location? And it may be that for some things that we're trying to access, the answer is no, really. It doesn't make a difference. And so you wouldn't bother doing a location-based difference in the requirements. And sometimes it might. And it can differ by application. So let's say you wanted to get to Exchange Online, and you wanted a policy that would allow somebody to get to Exchange Online, the web, I know it's not OA anymore, but the web app interface. And maybe we want somebody to be able to do that from a browser, from any location. So somebody needs to authenticate, and we think about, all right, let's look at those questions. We're doing this to enable this access for somebody who doesn't have an actual compliant device with them. So this is somebody who probably going to be, maybe on vacation, mobile, and it's not going to be everyone, right? We're going to have a bunch of worker profiles where that just should never be the case. So we want to limit that who to just the people who are going to need that access use case, and then narrowly tailor the what to just, in this case, Exchange Online, to that app, where we've already discussed isn't going to be a function, but how can they do it? And this is where we start needing to look at the strength of the MFA challenge. What are we going to require as far as low risk, low sign-in risk, low user risk? And I promised you I was going to cycle back to those things, and I will. But making sure that this access scenario is as safe as possible, and then also limiting the session time. So what does it look like? And there, the why would we set that up? Well, perhaps there's a driver that isn't regulatory or a security policy, but actually a functionality request. We want to enable this for our C-suite when they're on vacation in Hawaii, so that they can stay in touch. But we want to do it in a safe way. So I said I was going to circle back and look at the, this is perhaps not specifically conditional access, but it's conditional access adjacent. When I talk about user risk policy, go to identity protection in Entra. User risk and sign-in risk. User risk, to give you a very high level definition, is are there any indicators that your account has been owned? Is it showing up anywhere on the dark web? Does it have some other history or indicators saying, you know what, this has been behaving weirdly. Maybe this account needs some attention. Sign-in risk is risk about that specific sign-on in that session. So impossible travel, maybe, and this has actually happened to me, where I've been traveling and signed in from an airplane, going through their remote connectivity and popping up someplace that I didn't live, that I wasn't traveling to, and that didn't seem to be on my travel itinerary. So
Excuse me, Aaron.
this is, yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if you're sharing it the same way again, because your screen's blurry again.
You know what? You are correct. Let me.
Okay, thank you. Yep, now it's clear.
Let me go back to that. All right. And hopefully you can see the screen and me at the same time now. All right. So this is where the sign-in risk comes in, and you can say, hey, you know what? Maybe we will allow this broader type of access, but only if there's absolutely no sign-in risk showing up, no user risk signing up. So you can tailor things quite a bit. Let me back here. All right. And so once you have that why, and you understand why you're trying to put in a protection, why you're trying to expose something but do it safely, that's where you can start looking at the wide variety of inputs to get checks on your identities, factor in what the endpoints are, what they're trying to get to, and how you want to put the enforcement of policies in place to help make that as safe as possible. All right, moving on, Security Service Edge, or in the Microsoft Entra implementation, it's global secure access, mostly. We'll talk about that in just a second. So the first thing is, and I term this in the way that was popular with the kids probably up until a couple of years ago. Why is SASE? And SASE, Secure Application Service Edge, is the kind of industry generic version of what we're talking about. And it's something that is come into being because of the needs that we've encountered with cloud adoption, more remote workforce, and the need for actually implementing zero trust, because a lot of our ways of doing things in this much more dangerous world have shown that we need to not assume things are okay. And here I want to just stop sharing for a second, and in order to address that why, I think it's worth taking a little bit of a historic view of how things were before we started encountering all of those forces of moving to the cloud, of the remote workforce, and how we did it, because that will reveal what SASE is there to address. So starting at the beginning, there was a time, once upon a time, when we had our on-prem network, and we would have AD, our directory, we would have an application server, we would have some other infrastructure servers and services, and we would have our person with their own computer. And what if you were inside and only working in this inside world, that's fine. But we have folks who would say, hey, I want to go and browse the internet. And so we started putting proxies in place to control what people could get to when they were using these work assets to go out and play on the internet. We want to make sure that they're not going to do any HR violations, that they're not going to connect to any dangerous sites where they could be bringing in malware, any number of scenarios. Applications, sometimes we want applications to be internet facing and be available. So that's where we have things like reverse proxy. To publish that and make it available from the internet. And you can tell that I'm not used to writing vertically by how chicken scratchy it is. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. And we also have for this other stuff. What if somebody's a remote worker? What if they're even not a remote worker? What if they were just traveling for a particular meeting? What if they're somewhere after hours? And that's where we've got VPN. Somebody could connect to the VPN to get access to that infrastructure or applications or whatever it is that they need to get access to. And then we'd have, DMZ, very perimeter based. So as we start moving to cloud services, we start running into problems. So let's look at M365, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, all cool stuff, right? So AD is going to sync up to, well, not Entra at the time, but Azure AD. You're going to have identities there, and that's tied to your tenant. So if this person wants to get out and access those services, they're going out through this proxy. Or if they're not going out through a proxy, there's some additional specified network route that is involved. And if somebody is remote and they want to get to Exchange Online or any other M365 service, then they either need to connect up to their VPN so that they can come out and connect to M365, or you need to configure some split routing so that they can just go there directly. Downside to that is that you have to configure the routing on all of those endpoints. And if you want to limit who can get to your M365 instance, if you want to protect it, then you want to control who can connect to it. And that's where we started getting a class of products, CASB, Cloud Access Security Brokers. And for that, you'd have an agent, and you could say, hey, I only want to let these connections come in if it's from a workstation with an agent on it, or if it's coming in through our corporate network, which is a fine solution as far as it goes, but it starts getting a bit complicated a bit quickly. Then we start looking at, I'm running out of room here, Azure. How is somebody going to connect up to Azure? And we can do the same kind of CASB stuff, but then they're connected to Azure. And for people with big Azure estates, that can be quite a bit to manage unless you just want it to be all or nothing. So looking at the vast emphasis of remote work that came about with COVID and is still prevalent today, once you've got a whole bunch of remote workers, doing this CASB management can be very difficult. And if you're going through VPN access, and we haven't even talked about getting to this kind of infrastructure yet, these VPNs can be saturated very, very quickly. So you've got what does the routing look like? What does the capacity look like? Oh, and then this remote person, are they just free to roam the internet? Or are you forcing them through your proxy, either along this route or through some sort of external exposure? And in Azure, you've got apps that you want to expose to the rest of the world, to the internet. You're not using that reverse proxy on-prem. You're publishing them directly. You're putting a registration in Entra, and that's great. But this is now a very separate mechanism. So what we're looking at with SSE products is a way to take all of these factors and these jobs and put them in a coherent product that can help us manage that access and put some additional controls on it. Because with a VPN, whether it's a VPN to our on-prem infrastructure or some sort of VPN to IaaS resources in Azure or another cloud, that isn't terribly granular. I mean, you can do some configuration with what segments you do or don't have access to, but it's not very granular. So we're looking for solutions that will allow us to manage that, that will allow us to maintain zero trust principles and request explicit authentication each time, and that allow us to do just enough access to only be granting the connection to the things that need to be connected to and not doing things in a kind of a wholesale way. So I'm going to flip back to sharing out the screen. Hopefully folks can see the screen at this point. There are in this security service edge, and I'll show you how it looks on that same kind of diagram. There are basically three services in global secure access. The Entra Internet Access, Entra Private Access, and Microsoft Access, which I have in parentheses because it's kind of a gimme. We've already looked at some of those use cases. And then Defender for Cloud Apps. These first three are Entra Global Secure Access, and Defender for Cloud Apps works in conjunction because Defender for Cloud Apps is essentially the CASB solution that we have already had that is now folded into this integrated solution suite. So just to go back to, stop sharing out. Let's go back to the board for a second. This is going to be an oversimplification, but what we're looking at is how do we get that job that proxy servers are doing and the reverse proxy servers and the VPN, how do we do that when we're not operating inside this circumference? And so wherever we have a circle, there's a circumference, but there's also a center. And that center at this point is going to be on the user endpoint. There is an agent, a GSA agent, which can be downloaded and deployed the way you would deploy any other agent. Right now, it's mostly Windows 10 and 11 availability. There is some preview for Mac OS and iOS, and I believe there's an Android agent that's generally available. But so let's look at the remote worker with their laptop. And, first is that Microsoft access that we talked about. And here, so you've got the GSA agent, and sure, there is an on-prem place with its own resources, and that's great. But then we've got Entra and M365. And the GSA agent actually talks to the GSA service and forwards the traffic to it. And it does that with secure tunneling. And because this GSA service is integrated with Entra, is part of Entra, we can also apply any conditional access rules we want at that connection. And then connect to M365 again securely. So it gives us this integrated path. And like, okay, that's great. How is that different than a normal scenario where you've got a CASB agent and it's just routing directly? Well, it's making sure there's an extra layer of security. You're asking for some explicit authentication and getting some additional control, which can be different. And because it's integrated, you're also basically saying, hey, M365 tenant, this is how I want to have you accept or reject connections in a way that is entirely integrated with what's going on here. If you still have users that are on an on-prem network, they're still using endpoints. So this still applies within the network routing of your on-prem network, even if they are there. So it gives a very unified methodology for that access. So that's Microsoft access. What about the internet access? What about the stuff that having that proxy server would do? I want to do some filtering. This is still a corporate asset that they're working on. I don't want them going out to suspiciousdownloads.com and trying to get free software or the future winning lottery numbers or whatever that's going to expose you to some issues. So same GSA agent, you have policy for internet access, general internet. And what's nice about this is, again, you can have some protection and some conditional access policies applied to that. And this is where we start working in combination with Defender for Cloud Apps, because if we want to define how we're going to get to or not get to sources of potential shadow IT, somebody wants to connect to Box, somebody wants to connect to Facebook and share something, somebody wants to connect to Gmail. You can do some governance of that with your internet internet access policies and manage them centrally. And if you wanted to have them be differential based on location, you could do that, or based on who the user is, you could do that. But again, we go back to before you start getting too elaborate with it, you need to know the answer to the question why. How is this going to be an expression of your security policy? And then finally, and this is where the gold is the Entra private access. So you've got in Azure you've got your web apps and they're registered in Entra, and that's great. You've already got the conditional access. But what about platform as a service resources? What about IaaS resources? What about that infra and non web app enabled stuff that might still be on-prem? And with the web apps, by the way, there is already a solution. If you've got a web app, there is an agent that can communicate with Entra, puts a registration in there, and you can treat it like any other application, and it would be available for some conditional access. But for a lot of the things that you would still get back to, where the solution right now is a VPN, right? Again, we're in a now you need a separate VPN client. Now you need to make sure that it's tailored to have access to the right stuff. If you want any kind of granularity, that can involve a lot of complexity or different methods of connecting. But here with the private access policies as part of global secure access, you can do the same thing that we've been doing here. You still do need to have an agent deployed on the network. But once you do, you can route the traffic up to global secure access, have a secure connection, have conditional access policies. And the cool thing about this, the really cool thing, is that it's not an all or nothing access. You can have access to just a resource or just a particular application or a set of them based on the policies, and get it so that you're not just giving blanket approval because you need to give somebody a connection. And this also works not just in Azure and not just on-prem, but it can work in other clouds as well. So if you've got IaaS and PaaS workloads in AWS, this can help you get to them, manage that connection, and apply those conditional access rules as you're doing it in a coherent, consistent way. So that is pretty cool stuff. Let me just look at my list and make sure that didn't leave anything out. I think I'm good. Let me go ahead and reshare the screen. So now, going through that, and I've actually leapt past why you have SSE offerings to look at Secure Service Edge directly and the pieces of it. And there's an additional, let me unzoom myself here. I'm gonna go back. Here we go. Global secure access. Let's look at traffic forwarding, because this is where the action is. And I don't have a lot configured in here, but this is where we've got the different profiles for Microsoft traffic, where you can still have multiple policies for different cases for how we're going to route that, how we're going to control that, what circumstances are going to be allowed. Is this displaying okay?
No.
No?
No, it's back to the blurry screen.
Okay. Let me turn off my camera. Screen. How's that?
Yeah, that seems to work.
Okay, great. So Microsoft traffic, internet access, profiles. Again, this is where you can do a lot of great filtering about what people are allowed to get to or not. And private access. So this private access is the VPN killer. You want to totally streamline the control of how you connect to those internal resources. This is an incredibly powerful tool. And now going back to some of these conditional access policies. This is where when we look at the target, instead of doing something to regulate cloud apps, global secure access. And here I don't have the private traffic configurable because, again, I just don't have the connector. For private traffic, you need to tell GSA how is it going to connect into the environment. So you need to have an environment to connect into. But you can have, instead of specific target resources, just basically say, I'm applying this conditional access policy to that internet traffic connector. So you can have your multiple conditional access policies for different conditions in each of these. There's also a quick access. You can only have one quick access policy, but this is kind of a good default for, hey, we want everybody to be able to get to X, Y, and Z without a whole lot of additional logic to it. We don't need to pick it apart. So, it's okay and it's a place to start, but really looking at those use cases of the things that cover the kind of stuff that we would do with app proxies, reverse proxies, web app proxies, the kind of things that we would do with a proxy to control our web interactions, and also the VPN. This covers that in a way that is entirely integrated with Entra, and conditional access can make use of telemetry about user risk, sign-in risk, and as we saw, also things like insider threat. And as we get more and more integration and you start getting fancy, this is where you can say, hey, here's my repository of things that are all of a certain data classification, and start tailoring conditional access rules to that. There's the purview conditional access. So it builds out from there. Let me flip back to, here we go. And I've already started speaking a little bit about how they can work together, and we're a little later on time than I wanted to be. Apologies for rambling on there at points, but at this point, I would love to just open things up. I can look in chat. Do we have the ability to allow people to come off of mute if they want to?
Yeah, I believe you can unmute.
I don't want to force people to unmute, but I want to allow people to unmute if they are so moved. But certainly, I'm looking at the chat. If you want to put a question into chat, if you have any thoughts, questions, things you want to discuss.
Yeah, look in the, can you see the question pane? There's a question.
Questions. Okay, I'm muted by org. Okay. Turning audio. This is my audio settings. see.
Can you see the questions, Aaron?
I can see there was a question, or somebody had put in the questions that they were muted.
If you scroll to the bottom,
Mhm.
do you see the question from Jay?
I do not. I'm seeing
Okay, I
in the
can
chat.
read it.
Yeah, thank you.
Does the GSA agent work as a DNS filter? How is it filtering internet access?
Okay, so this is really interesting. You don't even have to have direction to any particular DNS server for this, because it doesn't even need to be something that you can fully route to from the endpoint, so long as you've got an FQDN to point it to, because you'll route that traffic to the GSA. The GSA can resolve it. So if it's an external, like an internet site, you can do the resolution there. If it's part of your internal infrastructure, whether that's on-prem or Azure IaaS or what have you, then part of the definition of that location or that. Hey, sorry, somehow got muted. That process of configuring the connection also gives you the information needed to then route the traffic there. So hopefully that addressed that question. I don't know why I'm not seeing questions.
If you can't see, yeah, that's not a big deal. I can read these. A follow-up from Jay. So it would route all traffic through the service and evaluate policies for external access through the service? Question mark.
Yes. Yeah, unless there was an exception policy that was basically saying for X, Y, and Z, don't use it. But aside from an exception policy, it routes things. It routes things through the service. And let's see, I'm still sharing my screen. There is. Go back. This is why this. If you look at this section, it's traffic forwarding. So it's basically a proxy for everything.
Okay, we have a question from Daniel. The GSA won't function as a tunnel, all VPN client, for example. Should I read that again?
Yeah, please.
Okay, the GSA won't function as a tunnel, all VPN client, for example.
Hi, this is Daniel.
It's
actually, I think that was answered in the last question, but as a tunnel all VPN is what I meant. But it sounds like it can be based on the last answer you gave.
Well, again, it's almost like, again, there are three fundamentally different profiles where it's, what is this traffic? And is it M365 traffic, which is treated differently? Is it a traffic to a specific private resource? So it's kind of like multiple situational VPN replacements. And yeah, the value of it is in the granularity. So having a default all traffic, like, I guess you could. I haven't looked at that yet and dug into it, but yeah, I guess you could certainly, like most policies, you want to have a default policy. I haven't gotten to anything else So this is how I want to treat this particular situation.
Right. So most deployments are usually split tunnel, like you saw, like you demonstrated in your diagram on the whiteboard.
Yeah, and yeah, this is to get away from managing that split tunneling into, kind of a unified tunneling. So that's my yes and no answer
Gotcha.
or response. But yeah, looking at doing that kind of default, that's something I would love to dig into.
I have one final question, not to take up anybody else's time for the questions. Would you recommend any material like online for labbing this out ourselves to test out GSA, for example, on some like test computers and roll them into Intune, et cetera?
Obviously, I will happily refer you to Microsoft's own information on this. There is some good high-level stuff. There are a couple of MVPs out there who I follow on. They've got great YouTube channels that I would be happy to send you links to. But we're also happy to dig into this, roll up our sleeves, and look at your use case and figure out a way to let's do an MVP implementation to let you start kicking the tires and figuring out how it best fits into your environment. So happy to do that with you directly as well.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, the links would be appreciated, but yeah, I mean, in the future, we already have separate talks with that Atmosera as a possible vendor. So,
well, I'm sure we could help you out. We've got, we do include security service edge as part of the library of things that we take on, both as professional services and also as managed services. So once you get things in place
right.
and you need to manage that, that is absolutely something that's in our wheelhouse.
Okay.
So,
well,
yeah.
I'm going to have to drop off, but yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was good.
Oh, thank you for your questions. Really appreciate it.
Have a good one. All right, bye.
You too. Any other questions? I'm not seeing anything still. I clearly have spent too much time looking into global secure access and not enough time looking into the particulars of GoToWebinar. But I'll tell you what, if there aren't any additional questions, let you go. And we do have a poll for folks if you're still on. Let me see if I can launch this poll, and then we'll be sending out a follow-up to see what additional questions you might have, any thoughts for the future. And Rachel, I don't seem to have the poll to select. Oh, there we go. Launch. All right. Well, thank you very much for attending. Hopefully you got something out of this. And I am more than happy to chat with you further if you have any questions. I believe my email, my Atmosera work email is attached to this. And yeah, browse safely. Take care.
Thank you all.